I was buried in paperwork at the office, my mind half focused on a particularly stubborn case, when the phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, and I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. Hello, is this Cassidy Monroe? The voice was urgent, tinged with a kind of tension that made my heart skip a beat. Yes, this is she, I replied, already feeling a knot form in my stomach. This is Mercy Hospital. Your husband, Bryce Caldwell, has been in an accident. You need to come quickly. The world around me blurred. I barely remember grabbing my bag and rushing out, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Bryce and we had our issues, sure, but this was different. This was life or death. When I reached the hospital, the sterile smell hit me first, then the sight of Bryce, pale and bruised, lying in a hospital bed. Relief washed over me seeing him alive, but it was quickly overshadowed by the presence of a woman standing by his side, her expression unreadable. Cassidy, Bryce croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. This is Vanessa. She's the business partner. Vanessa gave me a tight-lipped smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Something about her presence felt off, like she belonged to a part of Bryce's life I didn't know about. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral, though my mind was screaming questions. Nice to meet you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Bryce looked at me, his eyes pleading, but for what? I couldn't tell. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. Find out what? I wanted to ask but held back. Instead, I took his hand, feeling the tension in his grip. We'll talk later, I said softly, trying to convey reassurance. Vanessa's phone buzzed, and she stepped away, leaving Bryce and me in a heavy silence. I watched her go, noting the way she glanced back at Bryce, a look that was too familiar for my liking. What happened? I finally asked, needing to focus on something tangible. Car came out of nowhere, Bryce said, wincing. I didn't see it. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, piecing together fragments of the scene before me. Bryce injured. Vanessa, too close for comfort. My life, suddenly thrown into disarray. As the day wore on, Bryce drifted in and out of sleep, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I watched the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, trying to quell the growing suspicion in my gut. Vanessa returned, her presence a reminder of the questions that hung between us. I'll be back tomorrow, she said, her tone casual, as if this were an everyday occurrence. Thanks for being here, Bryce replied, his voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. I forced a smile, but inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. As I sat there, the hospital's fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There was more to this story, and I was determined to uncover it. As I left the hospital that night, one thought lingered. What else was Bryce hiding? The hospital room was a revolving door of tension. Lorraine and Gerald Caldwell arrived, their presence as imposing as ever. Lorraine's eyes swept over me with a critical gaze, her disapproval as tangible as the antiseptic smell in the air. Gerald, ever the businessman, acknowledged me with a curt nod before turning his attention to Bryce. Bryce, you need to focus on recovery. We can't have this kind of distraction affecting your work, Gerald said, his tone a mix of concern and command. Bryce, looking weary, nodded. I know, Dad. I'm doing my best. I stood by Bryce's side, feeling like an outsider in my own life. Lorraine's eyes flicked to me, her lips curling into a tight smile that held no warmth. Cassidy, dear, how are you holding up? This must be quite the ordeal for you. I returned her smile, equally tight. I'm managing, Lorraine. Just glad Bryce is okay. She nodded, but her expression said she didn't quite believe me. Well, it's important to stay strong. For Bryce's sake, of course. The insinuation hung in the air, and I bit back a retort. It was always like this with Lorraine, her words layered with meaning, each one a subtle jab. I focused on Bryce, squeezing his hand for reassurance, though I wasn't sure who needed it more. Later, as Bryce napped, I stepped out into the hallway for some air. My parents, Helen and Frank, had arrived, their familiar presence a welcome relief. Mom enveloped me in a hug, her comforting scent grounding me. "Cassidy, how are you really?" she asked, pulling back to study my face. "I'm okay, Mom. It's just a lot," I admitted, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. Dad, ever the pragmatist, nodded. "You know we're here for you. Whatever you need." I nodded, grateful for their support. "Thanks, Dad. I don't know what's going on with Bryce." "And Vanessa?" Mom's brow furrowed. "Vanessa?" "His business partner," I said, the words tasting bitter. "She was at the hospital when I got here. It's just strange." Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. "Be careful, Cassidy. You don't want to get caught in any of their family's mess." I nodded, knowing he was right. But something in me needed to know more. I couldn't just let it go. Back in the room, Bryce was awake, looking more alert. I sat beside him, trying to gauge his mood. "Bryce, about Vanessa?" He sighed, cutting me off. "Cass, she's just a colleague. I told you." I nodded, but the doubt lingered. "I just want to understand, Bryce. This whole thing, it's not adding up." He looked at me, his eyes pleading again. "Cassidy, please. Can we just focus on getting through this? I need you." His words, a mix of sincerity and desperation, tugged at me. But there was something else, a flicker of something he wasn't saying. As I left the hospital that day, a new determination settled in. Bryce's world was full of shadows, and I was determined to bring them into the light. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm was yet to come. Back at home, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. I tried to focus on Lila, her innocent laughter a balm to my frayed nerves. But even as I played with her, my mind kept drifting back to Bryce and the unanswered questions that loomed over us. Later that evening, as I was tidying up, Bryce's phone buzzed on the counter, displaying a message notification. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Curiosity and a sense of dread battled within me. Finally, I picked it up, the screen lighting up with a series of cryptic messages from Vanessa. "Meet tomorrow. We need to talk. Urgent. Can't wait." My stomach twisted. The words were innocuous enough, but the context made them feel like a dagger. I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just business. It couldn't be. When Bryce came into the room, I could barely look at him. "Bryce, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. He nodded, but there was a tension in his posture, a reluctance that set my nerves on edge. "What's up?" I gestured to his phone. Vanessa messaged. She said it's urgent. His expression flickered, a momentary lapse that spoke volumes. "It's just work stuff, Cassidy. Nothing to worry about." The casual dismissal made my frustration bubble over. "Work stuff? Bryce, this doesn't feel right. You're hiding something." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Cassidy, please. I'm dealing with a lot right now. Can we not do this?" The plea in his voice tugged at me, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion. "I just want the truth, Bryce. Whatever it is, we can handle it. But I can't keep feeling like I'm in the dark." He looked at me, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite read. "I'm trying, Cass. I really am." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again, breaking the moment. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. "I need to take this," he said, stepping out of the room. I watched him go, the distance between us feeling insurmountable. The sense of betrayal was like a physical ache, and I knew I couldn't just let it go. Not this time. The next day, as I sat at my desk, the weight of everything bore down on me. My work suffered, my mind too preoccupied with the turmoil at home. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. During lunch, I made a decision. I would confront Vanessa. I needed to know what was really going on, and Bryce wasn't going to tell me. I found her contact in Bryce's phone, my heart racing as I typed out a message. "Vanessa, this is Cassidy. We need to meet." Her response came quickly, almost as if she'd been expecting it. "Sure. Let's talk." As I set up the meeting, a mix of fear and determination settled over me. This was a risk, but I had to take it. I couldn't keep living with the shadows lurking in my marriage. That evening, as I prepared to meet Vanessa, I felt a shift within me. This wasn't just about uncovering Bryce's secrets. It was about reclaiming my sense of justice, of truth. Whatever I found, I knew it would change everything. But I was ready to face it, no matter the cost. Meeting Vanessa was like stepping into a different world. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where secrets felt safe. She was already seated, her posture relaxed but eyes sharp, watching me approach. "Cassidy," she greeted, her tone polite but distant. "Vanessa," I replied, taking a seat across from her. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension. She sipped her coffee, her gaze never leaving mine. "So, what did you want to talk about?" I leaned forward, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I want to know what's going on with you and Bryce. This isn't just business, is it?" Her expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. "Bryce and I have a complicated relationship, but it's not what you think." I raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Then help me understand. Because right now, it feels like there's a lot I don't know." She set her cup down, the clink of porcelain punctuating the silence. "Bryce and we have history, but it's not what you think. He's been under a lot of pressure, and sometimes he confides in me." The words were carefully chosen, but they didn't soothe the unease in my gut. "Confides? About what?" "About his family, his business. You know how it is with the Caldwells," she said, her tone almost conspiratorial. I nodded, though the explanation felt too neat, too rehearsed. "And the accident? Was that just bad luck?" Her eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. "It was an accident, Cassidy. Nothing more." The conversation left me with more questions than answers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa was holding something back. As I left the cafe, I resolved to dig deeper. Whatever was happening, I needed to know the truth. Back at home, the tension with Bryce was palpable. He was on edge, his movements restless. I watched him, trying to gauge his mood. "Vanessa said you've been confiding in her," I said, testing the waters. He paused, his back to me. "I told you, she's just a friend." The words were clipped, defensive. "A friend who knows more about your life than I do?" He turned, his expression hard. "Cassidy, I'm trying to protect you. There are things you don't need to worry about." The admission stung, a confirmation that there were parts of his life I wasn't privy to. "I'm your wife, Bryce. I deserve to know what's going on." He sighed, the fight leaving him. "It's complicated, Cass. My family, they have expectations. And Vanessa, she's been helping me navigate that." His admission shifted something in me, a mix of anger and understanding. "So, this is about your family?" He nodded, his eyes weary. "They want control, Cass. Over everything. And I'm stuck in the middle." The revelation was a turning point, forcing me to reevaluate everything. Bryce wasn't just hiding things from me. He was trapped in a web of family expectations and deceit. As I processed this new information, a plan began to form. If Bryce was caught in the middle, then maybe I could help him. But it would mean confronting the Caldwells head-on, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Yet, as I watched Bryce, I realized I had no choice. The stakes were higher than I'd imagined, and the path forward was fraught with danger. But for the sake of our family, I was willing to face it, whatever the cost. The proposal came out of nowhere. Bryce and I were sitting in the living room, Lila asleep upstairs, the quiet of the house a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. He looked at me, his eyes earnest, and said, "Cassidy, let's start over. Move away from all this." I blinked, taken aback. "Move? Where would we go?" "Anywhere," he said, a hint of desperation in his voice. "Away from my family, the business. We can have a fresh start." The idea was tempting, a chance to escape the shadow of the Caldwells and the secrets suffocating our marriage. But it felt like running away, and I wasn't sure if that was the answer. "And what about everything here? Your family, your job?" He sighed, a deep weariness in his expression. "I need to break free from their control, Cass. I can't keep living like this. His words resonated with me, but there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. Bryce, I want to believe this will fix everything, but what if it doesn't? He reached for my hand, his grip firm. It's a chance, Cass. A chance to build something new. I nodded, though doubt lingered. I need to think about it. The conversation hung between us, unresolved, as the days passed. Bryce seemed more at ease, as if the mere possibility of leaving had lifted a weight from his shoulders. But for me, the uncertainty gnawed at my insides. One evening, as I was putting Lila to bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. There's more to Vanessa than you know. Be careful. My heart raced, a mix of fear and curiosity. Who is this? And what did they know about Vanessa? I glanced at Bryce, his focus on the TV, oblivious to the turmoil swirling around me. The message was a catalyst, pushing me to dig deeper. I couldn't just sit by and let things unfold without understanding the full picture. I needed to confront Vanessa again, this time armed with the knowledge that she wasn't just a bystander in Bryce's life. The next day, I arranged to meet her again. My resolve hardened. When I arrived, she was already there, her demeanor calm, but her eyes watchful. Cassidy, she greeted, her tone neutral. Vanessa, I replied, my voice steady. I need to know the truth. What's really going on? She sighed, as if weighing her options. Cassidy, I told you. No. I interrupted, my frustration boiling over. No more half-truths. I need to know what you're doing with Bryce. Her expression shifted, a crack in her facade. It's not what you think. I'm trying to help him. Help him how? I pressed, unwilling to back down. She hesitated, then leaned in, her voice low. Bryce is in over his head. The family, they're not what they seem. The admission was a revelation, a glimpse into the tangled web Bryce was caught in. But before I could ask more, Vanessa's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her expression tightening. I have to go, she said abruptly, standing up. Wait, I called after her, but she was already walking away, leaving me with more questions than answers. As I drove home, the weight of everything pressed down on me. Bryce was right. We needed a fresh start. But leaving wouldn't solve the problem if the roots of it were still buried deep in his family's machinations. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. I couldn't sit idly by. I had to take action, to protect my family and uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And as the night deepened, I knew the time for decisive action was fast approaching. The Caldwell estate was a sprawling testament to wealth and power, each corner exuding a kind of cold opulence that felt suffocating. I arrived at the family gathering with Bryce, my nerves frayed, but my resolve firm. This was the moment to confront Lorraine's disdain head-on, to stand up for myself and my family. The room buzzed with chatter, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. Lorraine, ever the socialite, held court in the center, her sharp eyes scanning the room. When they landed on me, her smile was all teeth, devoid of warmth. Cassidy, so glad you could join us, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Thank you for having me, I replied, matching her tone with as much grace as I could muster. Bryce squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of support. But I could feel his tension, the weight of his family's expectations pressing down on him. As the evening wore on, Lorraine found her moment. She approached, flanked by a few of her closest allies, her gaze appraising. Cassidy, dear, I've been meaning to ask. How do you handle being married into such a demanding family? It must be quite the adjustment. The question was a thinly veiled attack, her words laced with condescension. I felt the room's attention shift to us, the air crackling with anticipation. I took a breath, forcing myself to stay calm. It's definitely been a learning experience, I said, my voice steady. But I'm committed to making it work. She raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. I suppose it takes a certain kind of resilience. Not everyone is cut out for it. The implication was clear, and my resolve wavered. But before I could respond, Bryce stepped in, his voice firm. Cassidy's more than capable mother. She's proven that time and again. Lorraine's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly. Of course, Bryce. I'm sure you know best. The tension was palpable, the room silent as Lorraine's words hung in the air. I felt exposed, my insecurities laid bare for everyone to see. But Bryce's defense, though brief, was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself outside, the cool air a relief against my flushed skin. Bryce joined me, his expression weary. I'm sorry, Cass, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I should have done more. I shook my head, the fight leaving me. It's not your fault, Bryce. Your family, they're just hard to navigate. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and determination. We'll figure this out. Together. But as we stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were fighting a losing battle. The Caldwells were a force of nature, and I was just one person trying to hold my ground. Then, as if the universe sensed my despair, my phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Be careful. They're watching. A chill ran down my spine, the words a stark reminder of the unseen forces at play. The stakes were higher than I'd realized, and the path forward was fraught with danger. As I looked at Bryce, I knew we had to act. But the question was how, when every move felt like it could be our last. The storm was here, and I wasn't sure we could weather it. The air was thick with tension as I entered the office building, my heart pounding in my chest. I had arranged to meet with Vanessa, determined to finally uncover the truth. The message from the unknown number had been the final push I needed, a warning that the stakes were higher than I'd realized. Vanessa was already there, seated at a table in the dimly lit conference room. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of calm that I couldn't quite trust. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Cassidy, she greeted, her voice smooth but lacking warmth. Vanessa, I replied, taking a seat across from her. I think it's time we put all the cards on the table. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering my words. And what cards would those be? Your plan, I said, my voice steady. I know you're not just a business partner. You're manipulating Bryce for your own gain. Her eyes flickered, a momentary crack in her composure. What makes you think that? I spoke to someone who knows you, I said, leaning forward. They told me you've been using Bryce to get to his family's wealth. Vanessa's expression shifted, her calm demeanor slipping. You don't understand, Cassidy. This isn't just about money. Then what is it about? I pressed, my frustration boiling over. She hesitated, then leaned back, her gaze piercing. Bryce is trapped, Cassidy. His family has him under their thumb, and I'm trying to help him break free. The revelation was unexpected, a twist that made me question everything. Help him? By manipulating him? By giving him options, she countered, her voice firm. Options he doesn't have with his family breathing down his neck. I paused, the implications of her words sinking in. Vanessa wasn't just an antagonist. She was a player in a larger game, one that Bryce was caught in the middle of. Before I could respond, the door swung open and Bryce entered, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. Cassidy, what's going on? I stood, my heart racing. Bryce, I needed to know the truth. About Vanessa, about everything. He looked between us, his eyes filled with hurt. You went behind my back? I had to, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't know what else to do. Vanessa rose, her gaze steady. Bryce, you need to decide. Are you going to let your family control you, or are you going to take charge of your life? The room fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on us all. Bryce's eyes locked onto mine, a silent plea for understanding. I'm sorry, Cass, he said, his voice raw. I've been trying to protect you, but I've only made things worse. I stepped closer, my resolve firm. We can figure this out, Bryce. Together. His expression softened, a glimmer of hope breaking through the tension. I want that. More than anything. Vanessa watched us, her own expression unreadable. Then make it count, Bryce. Don't let them win. The confrontation had revealed more than I'd expected, a tangled web of alliances and betrayals. But it had also brought Bryce and me closer, united in our determination to break free from the Caldwell's grip. As we left the office, I knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, I felt a sense of clarity, a renewed strength to face whatever came next. Together, Bryce and I would find a way to reclaim our lives, no matter the cost. The morning after the confrontation with Vanessa, the world felt different. Bryce and I drove to his family's estate, the weight of our decision hanging between us. It was time to face Lorraine and Gerald, to lay everything bare and reclaim our lives. The estate loomed large as we approached, its grandeur a stark reminder of the power the Caldwells wielded. Bryce parked the car, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice steady, but laced with apprehension. I nodded, determination coursing through me. "We have to be." Inside, Lorraine and Gerald awaited us in the opulent sitting room, their expressions guarded. The tension was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we were about to unleash. "Bryce, Cassidy," Gerald began, his tone formal. "To what do we owe this visit?" Bryce took a deep breath, his resolve firm. "We need to talk. About everything." Lorraine's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "What's this about, Bryce?" "It's about the control you've had over my life," Bryce said, his voice gaining strength. "And how it's going to change." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over us. I watched Lorraine, her expression shifting from surprise to something more calculating. "And what makes you think you can change it?" she challenged, her voice sharp. "Because I'm choosing to," Bryce replied, his gaze unwavering. "Cassidy and I are starting fresh. Away from all this." Gerald leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And you think you can just walk away?" Bryce nodded, his confidence growing. "Yes, we can." I stepped forward, my voice steady. "We know about Vanessa, about everything. And we're done being manipulated." Lorraine's composure slipped, a flash of anger crossing her features. "You think you can just leave?" "We're not asking for permission," Bryce said, his voice firm. "We're telling you." The confrontation was cathartic, a release of years of tension and control. As Bryce and I stood united, I felt a sense of clarity, a new beginning unfolding before us. But as we turned to leave, Lorraine's voice stopped us. "You might think you're free, but this family has a long reach. Remember that." The warning hung in the air, a reminder that our journey was far from over. But as we walked out, hand in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We had taken the first step toward reclaiming our lives, and no matter what came next, we would face it together. Outside, the sun was shining, a promise of hope and new beginnings. Bryce looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. "Thank you, Cassidy, for everything." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "We're just getting started." As we drove away, a lingering question remained. What would the future hold? But for now, I was content to embrace the uncertainty, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger and more united than ever before.